Missouri's linebacker room right now is an absolute embarrassment of riches. Let's talk about that and more on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hail, you true sons and daughters. I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first ticket purchase. And in just a little bit, I want to talk about the Missouri football schedule in 2025. And once again, especially compared to, well, teams that have performed pretty similarly in recent years, why doesn't Missouri get the benefit of the doubt nationally? But you know what? I want to start by talking about the Missouri linebacker situation, because this is actually something I've neglected to mention. A few days ago, Power Mizzou broke the news that Triston Newson is coming back next season under what I would call the Diego Pavia rule. Pavia, of course, the Vanderbilt quarterback, sued the NCAA and won for his eligibility of junior college not counting. And of course, with this now being the precedent, guess who's coming back? Triston Newson, the Missouri veteran linebacker who also spent some time in junior college. So with that new ruling, well, that opens up a lot of possibilities for other players as well. And considering how well I thought Missouri did in the transfer portal at the linebacker position, really Missouri didn't even need Newson to come back, in my opinion. So since he is now expected to use that extra year of eligibility and return, according to Power Mizzou, my goodness, you have got a heck of a linebacker room there. Josiah Trotter and Mekhi Bayer from West Virginia and Nebraska in the transfer portal, respectively, have already shown that they can play at this level. So you've already got your two starters filled right there, presumably. But again, with Newson back, well, now you're looking great. Plus, Khalil Jacobs returns. You got a bunch of young players that Missouri likes. Nicholas Rodriguez got some action as a true freshman last season, as did Jeremiah Beasley, Brian Huff on the roster. I mean, Missouri just has a lot of options, not only for next season, but in the future at the linebacker position as well. Really, I think the entire front seven for Missouri, when you include the defensive line, is looking really, really solid right now. I think on the interior was one of the few spots that Missouri really didn't use the transfer portal. And if anything, I think that shows some confidence in the interior line for Missouri. I certainly have all the confidence in the world right now in Al Davis, the Missouri interior defensive line coach. Regardless of who deserves all the Tigers credit there, if you will, Missouri's done very well at developing those big guys on the inside. So if they feel good about those guys on the roster, I feel pretty good about those guys on the roster as well. To me, what it's going to come down to for Missouri's 2025 offense, more than likely, I think at this point, is the secondary. Obviously, adding Stephen Hall is a big deal to compete in that Missouri cornerback room. Added a bunch of safeties, including Santana Banner, Jalen Catalon, and Mose Phillips, along with Dalen Carnell and Marvin Burks returning there. I think Carnell is an NFL player, as I've said before on this program. But to me, it's really those outside guys in particular. Obviously, the safeties are important too. But if Missouri can lock down the outside, if their cornerback play can go up significantly next season, I think you're looking at the makings of a really good and really deep Missouri defense in 2025. And when it comes to the Missouri football schedule in 2025, this is where the transfer portal worries me a little bit. And here's what I'm talking about, because as much as I enjoy college football as much as ever these days, you do wonder, Do these current Missouri players understand how important the Kansas game is in week 2 next season? Because I'll promise you this, Missouri is probably going to be, almost certainly, I should say, be a favorite in that game in week 2 next season, maybe even a significant favorite. But by significant favorite, I'm not saying 3 touchdowns. I'm saying maybe 1 touchdown, like 7 to 10 points, something like that. That's what I'm thinking in my mind, at least right now. So remember when Missouri in 2023 in week 2 had Kansas State scheduled and circled on its schedule in bright red ink, figuratively speaking, heck, maybe literally speaking in some cases. Well, that was a game Missouri felt like it had to win to have a big season in 2023. Well, I would say the same thing about Kansas in 2025. And while it's a different situation, Kansas State was the one who was nearly a touchdown favorite heading into Faurot Field a couple seasons ago. Well, Kansas will be the underdog, and they're going to kind of be about like Michigan against Ohio State at the end of last season. I think Kansas will come into Columbia knowing that if they're able to upset Missouri next season, that will make their season. Their coach is smart enough to figure that out. I promise you that. So if you're Missouri, if you're Eli Drinkwitz, if you're the senior leadership on this football team, make sure that your guys have not forgotten how important this game is historically, because even though it won't have been played between these two teams for, 14 years at that point when it actually does get played, everybody on the team will be, a 5 to 8 year old at that point when that game would have last happened. So they're going to have no conception of this. Well, regardless if it's Kansas, whoever it is, this is your Power 4 week 2 opponent. This is every bit as important as Kansas State in 2023. Then you throw on the historical factor of it, the fact that Kansas is going to be an underdog. They're going to have the nobody believes in us factor. They're going to have the underdog juice, if anything. All I'm saying is if you're Missouri, be ready to play in week 2. And if anything, get out that red Sharpie and start circling that one on the calendar too, because I promise you, we can't just sleepwalk through that game. That shouldn't be your mentality anyway. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm going to throw up a graphic here. Really quick, was put out on Twitter by SEC Mike. And as you can see here, Missouri has the easiest returning schedule based on the combined records of their 2025 opponents in this past season. The Tigers' opponents in 2025 went 76 and 76 for a perfect 500 record, whereas Arkansas, the best returning opponent's record, 106 and 53. So good luck to John Neighbors and the Hogs this season. But the point is, once again, you're going to hear the same talking point since Missouri does have essentially the exact same SEC schedule, just the home and away venues are flipped next season. So you're going to see a lot of the same talking points in 2025 in the preseason. But the bottom line here is that when I said in the previous offseason that if Missouri went 10-2, it really doesn't matter what the record is, how it happens. I think they'll get into the playoff. Well, I think in retrospect, we can all see that that was pretty obviously true. Had the Tigers gone 10-2, I think they'd have made it in. At the very least, they'd have been the last team out. I think that's very much the case, going to be exactly the same target in 2025. Simply win 10 games in the regular season, almost no matter what they are. As an SEC team, that's going to be good enough. I don't care if it is the easiest schedule in the conference or not. Remember, again, even a relatively easy SEC schedule is still a hard schedule. And why doesn't Missouri get the benefit of the doubt nationally, seeming the past couple off seasons anyway, in particular? Well, I do have a theory, but the good news is I don't think it particularly matters all that much anymore in 2025. Plus, I talked some hoops later with former Marquette High School coach Shane Matzen here in just a little bit. But first, TalkSPACE. Yes, Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where TalkSpace comes in. TalkSpace, the virtual leading therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With TalkSpace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, TalkSpace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this program, you'll get $80 off your first month with TalkSpace when you go to TalkSpace.com/locked on college and enter promo code SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to TalkSpace.com/locked on college and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show support for the show. That's TalkSpace.com/locked on college, promo code SPACE80. So when you look at a lot of preseason top 25 rankings at this point, and to be fair, it is awfully early, and in the transfer portal era, sussing out all of these rosters is rather difficult. I'll give all of the national people that. But you look at Andy Staples and Ari Wasserman, their top 25, for instance, over at on3.com, and gosh darn it, the Missouri Tigers are not a part of it. But what's interesting to me is you see a lot of teams in the top 25 here that Missouri has either beaten or at the very least been very competitive with in recent years. Teams like South Carolina, Florida, Auburn, Tennessee, Kansas State, for example, Oklahoma at 18th, by the way, in this top 25 here. But Missouri not in there. So what is the deal? Why does Missouri seemingly never get the benefit of the doubt? Well, for as much as I have tried to almost be a little hyperbolic in my blue blood talk, just trying to get people out of their old ways of thinking, for as much as I do believe that's true, hey, it's not as though the blue blood teams overnight are just going to start sucking. I understand that a lot of these teams still have massive coffers and huge advantages, especially, we just saw it with Ohio State, who's as blue blood as it can get. Yes, they famously had the most expensive roster, quite possibly, and they just won the national title. But when it comes to Missouri, I think they have every bit as much of an advantage and a case to be number 11 in the country, for example, as the Auburn Tigers. Auburn has a transfer portal quarterback, just like Missouri. They also have a ballyhooed transfer portal class and a strong high school class as well. So why Auburn 11 and Missouri not even ranked in the top 25? Well, quite honestly, you look at a team at number 25 like the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and to be brutally honest, Nebraska, while Missouri has certainly had the better program over the last decade or so, Nebraska still has more fans. And I think when you're a national writer, obviously by the time you've covered Ohio State and Texas and Oregon and Notre Dame and Georgia and Alabama and, yes, Nebraska and Auburn too, well, there just isn't as many, there's not enough hours in the day to spend as much mind share on Missouri. It's just as simple as that. But the good news is, again, in 2025, I just don't think that really matters all that much from Missouri's perspective because, again, if the Tigers go 10-2 in the SEC, all of this hype, all of this stuff, whether we have it or we don't, it doesn't really matter. And plus, again, unlike the old days, unlike the scholarship era that lasted 100+ years, well, in the new era of NIL, what's more important, your tradition or the number on the NIL contract that I'm about to sign? Seems like increasingly it's more about the dollars and cents, and frankly, who could blame the players for that? Again, I just think the point here is that Missouri is one of the teams that is the clear net beneficiary of it, whether the national people have figured that out or not. All right, joining me now, a man I have met, well, through the fabulous sport of golf, actually, but a guy I talk a lot of basketball with, actually, too. It's Shane Matzen, former head coach at Marquette High School in Chesterfield, Missouri. All you Missouri fans will know Ryan Rosberg, Andy Rosberg coached them, had all kinds of success. But you know what? We're going to get to Norm Stewart stories, all kinds of stuff. Coach, actually, I just want to get your view on the 2005 Missouri Tigers really quickly. I know you just happened to see them play in Austin recently, up close and personal. What are your thoughts on this team?
Yeah, I tell you, it's the one thing that sticks out to everybody, I think, is you talk depth with this team. And boy, the conversation can go a lot of different directions. And I know earlier in the year, of course, I'm an everydayer of yours, so I hear all the conversations.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. But people talk rotations and all this sort of stuff. Well, the way I look at it is most nights, and the other night in Austin was not one of those nights, but most nights, you're going to, number one, have at least one or two players that are going to be on, which how wonderful is that? Because if you got a rotation of 7 players, your odds aren't as good that way. And second of all, what I love about this Mizzou team, especially with the incredible atmosphere we have in the SEC now and all the different styles and how good everybody is from night to night, Coach Gates ought to be able to pick that group of players that can deal with the situation that he's dealing with that night. I'll tell you from a standpoint, one of the easiest years I ever had was over 30 years ago. I had a rotation of 7 kids. I had no decisions to make night to night. Right. Everybody knew, he's got a lot of juggling that has to go on as far as picking what's going to work for the team, keeping everybody happy. And I've been very impressed by it. I've enjoyed this team so much. I didn't enjoy the traveling that far to see what happened, but man, those nights are going to happen when you have a long season like this.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought the same thing similarly. Yeah, it's almost an easier equation when you got 7 or 8 guys, but when you've got, as he says 18 deep, realistically, let's say 13, 14, or 15 maybe, or 11 or 12 at the very least on most nights. How is it just trying to, I think a lot of people who maybe haven't played basketball a ton at least the high school level or coached at it, maybe they don't understand what a juggling of egos that is, just in terms of, hey, there's only 5 guys who can be out there.
It really is. And you and I grew up in similar backgrounds, both from small schools in Central Missouri. So we played for some great coaches and we knew what went on a daily basis just in that atmosphere. But now multiply it times, he's got a ton more depth than you and I dealt with back then. And even in my coaching days, and, he's dealing with guys that, hey, I want to be on TV. I want to be seen. And then you throw in the factor of the NIL and the re-recruiting of everything that you've got going on. I mean, there are so many balls up in the air with what these guys are doing these days. And I've heard you talk about it. The body language for the Mizzou Tigers this year is strong. And that has a lot to say towards not only the coaching staff, but the people that raise these young men. They did it right. Now, some of them may leave when the year's over because there's going to be opportunities, but I really have been impressed just watching from afar how they've handled that situation.
And coming up, Coach and I talk about the future of college basketball. He gets to show off his Big 8 championship rings. Yes, bling, bling, baby. It's a good time coming up. Norm Stewart stories, the whole deal, all that in just a little bit. But first, I want to tell you about Gametime, because if you're attending live sporting events, there is no better place to get deals on last-minute tickets than Gametime, especially if you use Gametime picks, filter out all the fluff, show you all the best deals, including like a $68 lower section ticket for Missouri against Ole Miss on Saturday. Sounds like a good deal to me. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that's a real challenge for Dennis Gates, obviously, not just the amount of guys, but yeah, the ability to go elsewhere now. Back in the day, Norm Stewart could be, and coaches in general, say Bobby Knight, they could be a little bit more aggressive with their coaching. Well, because where are you going to go? You're going to have to sit out, right?
Yeah,
Don't you
no
think there's
question.
some of that too? And I just think Dennis Gates, to your point, has done a really good job of adjusting to this environment for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And you saw it this year. I mean, there's a handful of really established, experienced, successful college coaches who've said it's too much. I'm going to move on, and I
Right.
don't blame them. But that's the atmosphere we're in these days, is trying to figure all this out. And I know you've said this, and I agree. I don't blame the kids for looking for the best opportunity. There's nothing wrong with that, and they deserve that. I think if a coach has the ability to go somewhere else for a better opportunity for him and his family, a player ought to be able to do the same. Now, can we make the way they handle their situations contractually more equivalent? That's where we need to get to.
Yeah, I think that's what's coming eventually, is some type of contractual agreements where, quite honestly, these guys are going to have to be, from a legal perspective, I think they're just going to have to be considered employees of the university at a certain point. There's going to have to be a real out in the open negotiation here. But you know what? Just specifically about this basketball team, one thing I've said, you say you're an everydayer, you've heard me say this probably ad nauseum. I wonder if you agree with me. I think one problem that this Missouri team has is their best 5 offensive guys don't always necessarily match up with their best 5 on defense. Do you see that trade-off there, that ebb and flow? And would you lean maybe toward more, which way would you lean in terms of that?
I think you got to ask an important question. And it comes back to this saying that I use with my Graves golf people, of who you and I have a relationship there as well. I don't want to succumb to pressure. I want to apply pressure. So at what point does one coach present a lineup that is a reaction to the other team, and the other coach presents a lineup that says, hey, how are you going to deal with this?
Right.
So, that's a fine line, because there might be a night against a Middle Tennessee State where there's no doubt where that line is. I'm going to apply it. But there might be a night when I'm on the road at Tennessee when I got to react to what's going on here. So, it's like everything else in life. There's a lot of gray there, depending on what the situation is.
Another thing I've been talking about with Dennis Gates lately is I've been praising his ability on game day, especially to give his guys a lot of rope, basically, to let them go out and make some mistakes and just not micromanage every possession, that type of deal. And earlier I was saying, hey, maybe Norm was a little more aggressive than Dennis Gates was. But I think something maybe Dennis and Norm had a little bit more in common. Norm wasn't much of a micromanager, and you were on staff with Norm at one point as a manager, right? Student manager, that type of deal. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I did it from 86 to 90. We had some pretty good teams. I always say it's a total credit to the statistical sheets that were issued to the coaches, and the towels and the quality of water made the difference for those teams back in those days.
Derek Chivas said it many times. Absolutely.
No question. Yeah. So, something I learned from Coach Stewart, and I think Coach Gates has learned it at a younger age than I did as a coach. Not that I'm in their realm, but it's just a part of coaching, is you start to realize that practices is coach time. That's when coaches shine. That's what you get paid for. And I think the fans in general, see games, and that's what they watch. But they're seeing 8 to 10% of the equation. Now, is it important? Yeah, because those are the results, and that's what you get paid on, are results, especially at that level. But I was in that group of people that if we had a crucial situation, I don't care if some Yahoo up in the stands is yelling, hey, you're going to go home with those timeouts, because I don't want the other coach to change defenses, because I know in my huddle that the last thing I say is the only thing they're going to hear. So I don't have time to put in 2 different sets for 2 different defenses. So I got to do my job at practice and have my guys prepared, because my guys, the last few years of my coaching career, and I give a lot of credit to my mentors like Coach Stewart, I felt like I did a good enough job in practice that if there's 30 seconds to go and we're down 1, we're not calling timeout. And my guys didn't look over either because they knew I trusted them. And that trust, and you want to go into Dennis Gates and how he coaches, they know he's got their back. And that's why he allows them to go play. And I think Coach Stewart was maybe Bob Knight was that way too. Didn't call a lot of timeouts because he thought he'd done his job in practice. So, yeah, I think I totally am on board with what you're saying there and what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think that style definitely yields a lot of dividends. And I think, yeah, that trust, then the player, as a coach, if you put trust in your players, when it works, in theory, right, when it works, I think they then have trust in themselves to go out and execute in those pressure-packed moments, which, again, back to golf, that's something on the middle side we talk a lot about too, having that routine and just making every shot the same, that type of deal. But a lot of it does come back to confidence in athletics for sure. And that's something, obviously, you've picked up a ton on over the years, so much to the point where Shane actually wrote a book, published it. Heck, I read the thing this past summer in Destin on my vacation, had a great time with it. It's called Coaching, Is It Worth It? And the answer, spoiler alert, absolutely, in parentheses there. Really good read. Shane, tell the listeners about your book and why you decided to write it.
I was out on a walk with a gentleman that you're aware of. His name's Paul Monahan, who actually serves as the mental game coach for our company, Graves Golf, that I work for now. And Paul was talking about his book, and I had always known at some point before I'm gone, I need to, there's a book in me. As I'm going on this walk, I think to myself, the book's already been written. You just need to gather it all together. So I had written for the Missouri Basketball Coach Association for several years. When I was once I retired from coaching, I was the activities director at Marquette High School here in Chesterfield. And I'd written a newsletter for my staff. I'd written over 330 of those things. And then now I'm writing for Graves Golf. And I compiled the ones that I thought were meaningful for folks. And you're talking about a book that's 250 plus pages, but has 200 chapters. So, and I know you were at the beach.
I love that, by the way. I love short chapters. It's the best.
And so, I mean, even if you're not a reader, I mean, you can read a 2-page chapter, or if you're between beverages out on the beach and somebody calls for you to go take a dip in the ocean, you can read one more chapter. But there's a lot there. And I know we're talking to a sports audience here. So to get into the inner workings of what it's like to grow up wanting to coach and what's involved with coaching, I think is an attraction maybe for somebody that's watching or listening to this. But there's a lot in there that's just observational stuff. And if you're not a sports person, you're gonna constantly go through there. And at some point you're gonna be like, oh yeah, I've lived that. So
totally.
Yeah. So I there's several Mizzou references in there for some of the things I did with Coach Stewart, and a lot of things that were very meaningful to me that he gave me as part of my experience with my 4 years with him.
Yeah, unlike you, Shane, I'd never have coached, but as somebody who played and has been through a lot of those type of competitive experiences, yeah, a lot of that stuff, it was just kind of a good reminder of, I've been through that. Like, for example, just one thing I really took from the book that, again, sports is just a preparation for life, I think, in so many ways. And one lesson that you had was just, it's so simple and to the point. It's just find a way. Anytime there's a difficult situation, a frustrating situation, maybe you're feeling down, just find a way. Put one foot in front of the other, find a way. And when you do, boy, you feel really good after it. I promise you that. There's that sense of accomplishment, all that stuff. Again, to me, just a great book. Again, I could read a 1,000-page book if there are 500 chapters. So well done there in terms of production. That was smart thinking there.
I appreciate that. And
you understand the short attention span of 2025.
I wrote that for guys like you, but yeah. So it's really easy to get. If you go on Amazon, you can look up my name, you can look up the title of the book, grab you a copy. I'd really appreciate it. But I know this is a Mizzou-centric audience, so if you want a couple of stories that's going to make you even feel better about, a great Missourian with Norm Stewart, there's a couple in there. Absolutely. Those 4 years at Mizzou were such a huge part of my life. And hey, I told you before we got on here, I never put these on, but for this, 2 Big 8 championship rings. And so I had to get them out for this. And, Mizzou means everything to me. And I got no trouble traveling to Austin to see my Tigers play.
How beautiful is that? Those rings in the shot. Also, the Beat KU towel
I had to put
nicely in
that
the
up too.
background. Well played, sir. You are indeed a true son. Hey, this has been a great time. Again, the book is Coaching. Is It Worth It? Absolutely. Pick it up on Amazon. Shane Matson, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a long time coming. I'm going to have to send you some golf videos very soon. Maybe you can get me straightened out.
You know that's what we're looking for from you as a good grade student. But hey, John, this was great. It was very much an honor to be on your podcast. Thank you very, very much.
Appreciate you, sir. And every day for your second listen, check out the Locked On SEC podcasts. And I will see you tomorrow after the Missouri Ole Miss game right here on Locked On Mizzou.